Dan, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
I'm doing well, brother. Good to be able to catch up after a couple years here.
I know it's been a while, and thank you so much for taking the time today. You've been flying around and traveling quite a bit. The summer has been a busy summer already for you. So, really appreciate you taking the time. Before
Of
we get
course.
started and dive deep into AI and the industry and enterprise and stuff, why don't you start with your story? Give us your background and what's your story?
Sure. People know us or know my work here at Emerj best for sort of covering the ROI of AI in important sectors. So we're a market research and publishing firm at Emerj. We serve sort of bigger enterprises that are looking to get a gauge on where they should invest their funds and what direction they should head in. And then we work with the vendors who want to be able to reach that enterprise audience. Of course, we've got about 1.5 million folks, listeners and readers in a given year across Emerj. But I didn't start off as a computer science guy, Ganesh. You and I actually never went into this when we first met here. But I went to graduate school for kind of the human correlate for machine learning, which is skill acquisition and skill development. Or oh, can you hear me? Okay, by the way,
Yeah, I can.
we can edit this if we need to.
I can hear you fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay, got it. So I went in for kind of the human correlate of machine learning, which is skill acquisition, skill development, or adult learning.
Hmm.
So I went to University of Pennsylvania, positive psychology program there. I wanted to know, how can humans learn to learn faster? What's the neuroscience and cognitive science for
Nice.
skill acquisition? And by the time, so while I was there, this is 2011. I was getting tapped on the shoulders by it was actually business school people, but they were talking about what was happening in computer science. They're like, "Hey, you're doing all this adult learning. You know about machine learning?" And this is 11 years ago, so I was like, "I don't really know about machine learning." And back then, UPenn was working with Google on determining sentiment from Twitter data and searches and other
Yep.
kinds of interesting things. Very early NLP, right? And this is around the same time as ImageNet. And by the
Yep.
time I graduated from UPenn, I was like, wow, I might have gotten the wrong degree. And so I became pretty well convinced at that point back in 2011 that AI was going to be a very big deal and extremely transformative, not just in business, but frankly for kind of humanity in the 30, 40-year time horizon, at least is my belief. And from there, I had other companies to grow and sell. I had a martial arts gym, which is how I paid for grad school. I never had a job. I just was training fighters. It's when my ears are all messed up
Oh,
here. I got
were you
the
jiu-jitsu? Were you Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
yeah,
You got a
pure
cap,
Brazilian jiu-jitsu, man, all
cauliflower
day.
ears, as they call it?
Yeah, cauliflower ears for sure. So many years fighting and training. That's what I was doing to pay for an overly expensive graduate degree. Was training fighters. But after that, I grew and sold an e-commerce business, kind of related to that industry. But the whole time, about 2 years after graduating school, I was like, I need to stay in touch with AI. So I was talking to obscure academics and people in the business world, and
Yeah.
initially just writing articles. Then 8 or 9 years ago, it turned into a podcast. And by the time I sold my e-commerce company, I said, great, I get to finally dive in full blown into AI, which is what I wanted to do all along. And yeah, fast forward. I mean, we've been lucky enough to give keynotes at United Nations headquarters and speak all over the world for the World Bank, and really bring sort of a trend and ROI focus to AI in a way that hopefully some of our listeners have found helpful. But started off at a very strange path to be where I am today, I think. Um,
No, it's Dan,
Unorthodox.
actually a fascinating background. In fact, your notion on thinking about how you started learning about learning, one of the biggest
Yes.
problems today in AI is we don't really still understand how humans learn. If we had, then we would be training neural nets a lot better because we're modeling it
Yeah.
around the same physiology, but we still don't understand how this actually works. So I think it's a very valuable background that you have there.
Well, it's so interesting you bring that up. I've been, for probably half a decade, I've been telling myself once a month, oh, you got to sit down and carve out time to write a big long piece about where the academic literature on skill acquisition intersects with ML, because there's actually human skill acquisition correlates to things like overfitting and underfitting for
Yep.
specific training circumstances.
Yep.
Like that you could literally layer over each other. But to your point, it's definitely not a direct one-to-one, right? But
No.
there is a
No.
lot of overlap that's massively fascinating. But my business audience probably wouldn't like it that much, and so I just haven't found the time to do it.
Well, it's
But
it's
yeah,
it's actually fascinating. All those lines are blurring. So, give us a view, Dan, on where
yeah,
what is the state of enterprise AI today? I mean, where is enterprise AI
yeah.
today?
Well, Enterprise AI today is, I guess, there's a short version that's somewhat optimistic, which is much better than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So, back in 2014, I would have said, what enterprise AI? And 2018, 2019, I would have grimaced a lot. I'm still grimacing a lot, but I would say it's significantly
Yeah.
farther along than it is today. So, compared to, let's just use 3 years ago. Compared to, let's say, 3 years ago, um, we see the proliferation of data science as a skill set and a respected skill set within the enterprise. We see that it's not as much hired and tucked into a dark corner as if its magic is somehow going to spread into the business, but actually is interfacing with subject matter experts sometimes in ways that are somewhat meaningful.
It's required.
Um,
Yep.
Yep, we're seeing very slowly and gradually, extremely painful, data infrastructure get leveled up to the point where we can actually use what we have and put it into use. That said, and there's some industries that are farther along than others. So financial services broadly is going to be farther along than many others. There's firms like logistics and manufacturing that pound for pound per revenue dollar, the number of deployed real solutions is going to be lower. But financial services, banking, or wealth management would be kind of top of the heap there. Banking,
Sure.
insurance, life sciences, probably in that order. Manufacturing, there's a lot of dollars, but there's not a lot of maturity. So there's industries that are also pulling ahead. Beautiful. Love it. Great things. We still see AI primarily playing at the surface. So what I mean by that is AI is today more of a topping on a pizza than it is sort of a baked in lasagna. So we're looking at existing ugly kludgy systems and for the most part figuring out, is there a way to predictively make this into a dashboard, go from kind of BI to something more predictive, or some way to take the streams of data that we have now, ugly and gangly as they are, build some
Mhm.
some additional potentially ugly and gangly thing that can maybe unlock, a little bit of a new skill and a little bit of a new efficiency. Way better than zero deployments. Way better than zero deployments. But it is for the most part playing at the surface. When you and I talk a little bit about where things will go in the future, hopefully that'll change.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got some ROI now. We've got industries pulling ahead. We've got skill sets and data maturity lifting, data infrastructure sort of being made better. But we're still seeing mostly popcorn projects and a lot of things dancing at the surface. We had a great phase of AI strategy. It was really an intellectual exercise. It wasn't very real in most enterprises, and we still see AI in isolated kludges for the most part.
No, it's actually what an amazing, short compression of the complexity of the industry right now. So it's pretty amazing where you pulled it together. And it's interesting to note a few things that you said, right? One is
Sure.
like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, even I look at it from I was running an AI company, two different AI companies, and it was
Yep.
easier to actually go in and say, hey, show a popcorn project, shiny object, and say, here's how we can actually transform your business, make that as a case to actually go get the bigger budget so we can actually deploy an AI strategy. That was the playbook. Every startup out there, that was a successful playbook. And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked for
Yeah.
everybody. And a lot of our partners, a lot of our customers, it worked really well because they were struggling to show to their business, their board, the value of it,
Yes.
right? So,
Yeah.
I remember like wealth management, one of the largest banks in the UK. I remember going and showing them. They were like, "How does AI really even come into play?" And then we actually set up an elaborate demo powered with machine learning and stuff that shows them that you have an AI powered copilot for the wealth manager that allows them to actually give 100% personalized 360 view support for their highest net worth individuals, right? So it was like, and then you showed that how they can use that to scale across the mass affluent, and kind of scales their business model and so forth. But it was needed, but that was what was needed, a lot of eye candy, so you can actually go and get the right
Yeah.
to play the bigger game, right? I think we're past that. Anybody doing that is not very successful. um,
I have so much to say on that. I want to let you finish though. Uh,
no, so I think my point was, I think that from that to now, I think even the buyers, the customers, the industry has gotten a lot smarter. They kind of have
yep.
fallen flat, got hurt a lot. They're like, okay, they can kind of smell bullshit mostly, when they hear bullshit, but still there's a lot of work to be done. But the part that really fascinated me when you were talking about is what you just said, which is a lot of the AI that's happening is still on the surface. And
Yeah.
I think, it just lays out the roadmap for the next 50 years for all these organizations to kind of look at, like, you can start doing all these popcorns, but if you're going to want to make fundamental changes and power and create AI as one of the parts of your operating system for the company, that's when you're going to start unlocking much returns, right? And unfortunately, outside of the big tech, the Apples and the Facebooks of the world, we haven't really seen that weave into the fabric across the industry.
No, brother, we haven't. And there's a lot of barriers to it. There's a lot of barriers, and we're gonna get to talking about ROI, and there's an unlimited amount to unpack here. But you're bringing up some very important points. The this idea of sort of getting AI to be baked into the fabric. One of the challenges here, and there's so many, is that to your point, we need to be able to show some momentum, right? And so
Yep.
sometimes that's like the shiny demo or whatever, and some of those turned out to be fluky and what have you. But we've got to be able to build momentum. So we want sort of an initial project that'll get some confidence and get leadership to say, okay, I'll give
Yep.
you some more dollars. And so that kind of a project can be good because it's what we need to operate in the cultures that we need to operate in. But often it's done without any awareness as to a broader roadmap of where we're going. So we have, if people Google um, enterprise AI roadmap Emerj, just Emerj. There's a graphic of this, which we beat the war drum on this every single day here at Emerj. But basically, thinking about not just the initial projects we can do. Oh, cool! Here's a little bit of efficiency we can squeak. Here's a little bit of a paperwork flow we can automate. Whatever. Or here's a dashboard we can augment to be predictive. Great. The question is, what capabilities does that build in terms of our internal skills and our data infra? And what capability does it build towards that's in line with our digital transformation vision? So when we think about where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years, is AI and data waking up at all part of what we want to turn into? If the North Star of what we want to become, it doesn't have to be defined by AI. So
Mm.
I'm not in the camp, and I don't think anybody with a brain is of the camp that we should look at AI and say, how do I rethink everything I do? That's
It's not
pretty
going to work.
ridiculous. However,
It's a tool.
however,
Yeah.
we should ask, where could it be a conduit to us serving clients, winning market share?
Yeah.
And if it's part of that vision, now we can start with those popcorn projects you and I just talked about. But I don't call them popcorn projects. Popcorn projects are randomly selected. They have no future. They're going to be a kludge. They're going to die in their little spun up AWS thing, and they're going to croak right there. That's where they're going to end. A conscious project is one that is headed towards that North Star that we just articulated.
Yep.
Its implicit purpose is to not just unlock the near-term ROI that it will unlock, but to build a bit of capability for data infra and for skills, and to work explicitly towards a higher level of capability. Maybe it's going from predicting inventory in this one warehouse to a greater transparency on all of our predictability. Maybe it's moving from automating certain customer service processes to automating much broader capabilities. But the question is, are we building capability and building to higher level use cases in line with a vision that's somewhat informed? And the fact of the matter is, Ganesh, it's going to take a very long time until that's the norm in the enterprise. We definitely have some ideas about what's going to get us there, but we're a long way from home right now in terms of getting there.
I agree. I think the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is worth noting, is capacity and capability development, right? I think one thing we've learned over the last 5 6 years is there used to be you can't buy AI. You can't just buy AI and then say, oh yeah, I have AI now as a organization is going to make a difference. But since it's such a compounding thing, right? You actually are investing in an infrastructure, people, talent, systems, and then you have to continuously. It's unlike traditional software entities. You can't just buy an AI and forget about it. It's constantly
Yeah,
evolving. It's almost like has life to itself. So it is an organizational and a technical capability you have to develop and in-house and build out that capability over a long period of time. So that's where that true north star of what are you trying to get to really comes handy.
yeah,
So you can align even those popcorn projects towards getting that to that path, right? um,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. So ROI, or I like to call it, I had
yeah,
Tom Davenport on the show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about, he's like, I call it, he's actually got a book coming out, and he calls it return on AI investment. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
ROI,
Sure.
ROAI as the play on words.
Yeah,
So where do you see how are organizations, are they seeing ROI, number one, today? And if they're seeing, where are they seeing that ROI today? Because if it's popcorn projects, is that really game changing ROI at all? And then third part of that question is going to be around, like, do you see a spread of that ROI across multiple industries and sectors as being very widely different? right?
Yeah. So great question here. Look, there is certainly some evidence of tangible return on investment for certain AI deployments. I mean, quite obviously, there's vendors now. Everything used to be a press release even 4 years ago. Now there's enough embedded success stories where we've got some real results to be able to show from some of these things. Um, Most of what vendors have learned to get there. So I'm going to take a pretty big picture view on ROI with you right now. Most of what vendors have learned to get there, and enterprises have learned in terms of adopting it and getting there, is that their narrow problems are really where AI has been able to sort of add value. So vendors initially thought when they went out, this is even 6 years ago, man, there's a whole new way to use this healthcare data, use this marketing data, use this whatever, and we could totally improve the way this operation works or this process works. Nobody wants to transform anything now, because they've realized that the less workflow change, the better. The less pipes we have to plug into to train our AI, the better. Now, we talked about this a ton when COVID first struck, that was going to be the general trend. Probably was the trend already, but it's certainly the trend now. It's that companies have realized in order to gain traction, get real adoption, use the interface somebody's already using, use the buttons and the workflows they're already using, find a way to layer in your value without really touching or transforming the core process. Now, I'm not critiquing that. Everybody's got to make their dollar, and at the end of the day, a lot of enterprises are really only ready for that. So we're kind of meeting in the middle here. Vendors really had these grand aspirations. Companies who were totally not ready for it, I think maybe had grand aspirations with no technical competence. And now they've met in the middle of, okay, what are the limited number of datas? What's the way I can augment this little iPad that your manufacturing person uses every day, and give it a
Yep.
little bit of like this augmentation,
Productivity
and boom,
improvement.
that's that.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. So surface level is where we've been able to see ROI. Much more deep and robust change has been rare. Not impossible, but much more rare to see change. Now, part of the challenge here is the following, Ganesh. Part of the challenge is, how are we measuring return on investment? Now, this is a monstrous topic, and we have, I mean, probably, if I had the time, I'd write a book about it. But I certainly, I don't know. It'll probably never happen. But the general idea is this: we have a kind of a Trinity model for AI ROI. So Emerj AI ROI or whatever. It's online. Very very simple graphic. It's simplest graphic that we probably have. We wish, so right now AI is measured in terms of some form of measurable return, which, by the way, we don't argue against. That's a
Yep.
great thing. Who wants to spend money on technology and have no measurement of return? So we're looking for generally financial. We want to see revenue go up. We want to see
Churn go down.
costs go down or whatever. Potentially, so that there's fuzzier versions of measurable ROI, by the way. Risk reduction is often quite fuzzy, but it's like pseudo measurable for some people, regulatory risk and things
Yeah.
along these lines. Another thing is customer experience, sort of, scores from customers, etc. There's ways to measure that, even if it doesn't immediately tie to revenue. Like churn would be really a revenue thing, but
Yeah.
customer experience scores would be less of that. So
NPS.
sometimes it's those things. Mostly it's going to tie to money, and that's fine and great and dandy. Here's the problem: there's two other really important elements of ROI that are almost entirely just not considered in the enterprise. And there's 1,000 ways to describe it. So when I think about what have we learned from the podcast by having 1,000 episodes, some of the most piercingly insightful things are that there's 50 million ways to say exactly what I'm going to say. And I actually think this is quite a dense way of framing it. I'm not proud of everything that we've ever said or written, but I actually think this is quite useful for enterprise folks.
Sure.
Is that there's measurable ROI,
Yep.
then there is strategic ROI, and there is capability ROI. So let me explain what I mean. Measurable ROI is what everybody already understands. Okay, when am I going to make my money back? Measurable ROI. Fine. I don't need to explain it. The next one, strategic ROI. Here's the question: is this project going to bring us closer to our 3 to 5 year goals, or that grand strategy vision, or is it supporting one of our key technology thrusts that's helping us to go in that direction? Again, we talked
Sure.
about the North Star. Is it
Yep.
in any way on the road to the North Star? In any way? Is it supporting a core initiative? Yay or nay? And the answer should be yay. The third thing is capability ROI. So capability ROI, which is absolutely, without a doubt, the neglected of the three. Now, strategy is straggling. Strategy is hardly getting fed any food at all. Strategy is like on its last legs. Nobody cares about strategy.
Yeah.
Capability doesn't even exist. Go ahead.
before you go into capability on the
Yeah,
strategy thing, how
yeah.
do you measure that? It's a yay or nay. Is it works
Well,
or
you're
not?
you're right. You're right. You're right. Yay or nay is a very rough proxy for this, and there's certainly deeper frameworks that we could go into for
Sure.
being able to come up with stronger proxies. The basic idea is the following: if we look at where we're going as a company at a high level, um, is this a project that is supporting us becoming what we want to become? Now
Okay.
that is fuzzy,
Yeah.
but does if our SMEs agree on that, if our leadership, the people cutting the checks, agree on that, here's what happens. Well, two things. Number one, we're building something that has the possibility of not being a popcorn project because it can grow, it can turn into something
Yeah.
meaningful.
Yeah.
No, so number two, we can push through the inevitable hurdles of AI projects. You know all of them. I'm not even going to list them all. Right?
Yeah.
It's going to take us 18 months to clean the data. Okay, most projects are going to die right there. But if they're important enough and they actually tie to strategy, if we wanted to make our money back in 6 months, nobody's going to deal with messy data. But if this ties to something that's critical for how the hell we're going to transform, and we can't do it with IT, we might still support it, Ganesh. We might still support it. So the survivability of worthy projects depends on at least some tie to strategic ROI.
I
You're
agree.
right to say it's
And
it's not measurable.
and you can,
Yeah, go
by the
ahead.
way, you can quantify that too, right? I mean, now when you're explaining it that way, right? Let's say, for example, it takes you, 68 months to get to your destination of that final place of where that strategy is going to lead you to. Well, using this piece of technology and this particular project, you're accelerating that, getting down to 48 months, right? That's still, you can kind of turn that into a measurable ROI if you really want to, but focused on the strategic goal, right?
Yep. Yeah. The simple rule of thumb, even before we get into measurement frameworks, which we could dive into a little bit, the simple rule of thumb is list the things that are absolutely most important, your key thrusts, your key technology investments, the key things you need to level up to become what you need to become. Literally, don't even write 10, write four of them. Does it have to do with any of those four? If not, we probably shouldn't do it. Like that's
That's
actually a
true.
very clean rule of thumb. Now, would I say that everybody should make $10 million decisions based on that? No, but is it a really strong rule of thumb? Yes, because if we have no strategic impetus behind the project, as soon
Yeah.
as we hit hurdles, we're not going to continue our investment.
Got it.
So strategy is highly neglected. We're thinking about AI like we're just sprinkling it on top. We're building all these technical debt piles here and
Yep.
there with AI, and we're ignoring strategy. Talk about. Let me just briefly get into capability, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So we have the critical capabilities of AI emerge. Again, Googleable thing, but we have a framework around what AI maturity is. Here's capability in a nutshell. Capability is the skills. So this is technical skills and the non-technical skills of AI adoption. So people stuff. Culture. So being willing to iterate, being willing to collaborate cross-functionally, etc. And it's also core infra and resources. The state of our data intake process, the state of our data infrastructure, the state of our ML and IT ops working together, things like that. So we've got kind of our resources, we've got culture, we've got skills. That's what capability is. It is the undergirding AI maturity that's going to support any project. Um, if we don't think about, I mentioned, and the ROI or the roadmap graphic shows this, an initial project should support a measurable ROI, and it should build some slightly higher level of capability that allows us to get to another potential measurable
Yep.
level of ROI that builds towards that North Star. If we don't consider the value of capability ROI, then we're even less likely to push through the inevitable hubbub of bringing AI to life. And I say this 100 times, and I'll say it 100 more. Yes, I think any investment, we should stack it as many chips behind it as we can to make sure that that thing delivers some kind of a return we can all be proud of. Let's absolutely do that. However, let's remember that in our first 10 to 20 projects, if they're all a small win, that's situation one. Let's imagine situation two where 25%, 35% of them are small
Me.
wins, but
Yeah.
our SMEs are smarter in terms of identifying AI and being able to work with data scientists. Our data scientists have become deeply embedded in subject matter
That's
expertise stuff.
capability
Our,
improvement.
our data infrastructure has started to wake up. If we've been able to shake capability ROI and AI maturity up, that is the soil that we're going to grow in. So let's
Yeah.
not ignore measurable ROI, but let's also remember the company that has 10 small wins and zero learning, zero maturity, and the company with three small wins and leadership, SMEs, and data infra are at a higher level than they were before, this company is winning the coming 5 years. And so, unless we think about how will this project level up our core data AI maturity, we're really missing some of the important elements of the boat here. So we would wish that enterprises would consider some of those factors in addition to measurable ROI.
No, and in fact, it's um, such a simple concept, but such a powerful concept too. I want to call out that capability ROI. And the last example you gave, you're an organization that has got three small wins, but you measurably improved your capability and you going closer to your strategy. Your actual ROI for AI is actually much higher than somebody who's got 10
Yeah.
small popcorn projects. They actually been very good, but they bought
Yes.
all those projects from vendors. They didn't bring any capability. They didn't
100%.
build any capability.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's interesting, because one of the things that I noticed is a lot of organizations that give up on AI too soon because they fail to measure the success or ROI across a broader lens like this, right? They
Yep.
go in and
Yep.
say, "Oh, did my retention rate for customers go up?" And the answer is, "Yeah, kind of, like 2%." I'm like, "Then AI is not worth it." They just give up and say it's
That's
not going to
it.
happen,
That's it. Yep.
right?
You're right.
And I think this provides a very I love that framework, and I'm going to look that up and put in the show notes too, right? That whole
Sure.
framework from
Sure.
Emerj AI framework, ROI framework. That's awesome. So um, we're running out of time too. So a couple of other things
That's
that I
fine.
want
That's
to
fine.
touch
Yeah. Yeah.
upon
Let's do it.
and get into, right? One is your podcast. Tell us about your podcast. I mean, you've been it was one of the
Sure.
longest running podcasts in AI, right? So tell me more
It's
and
been
tell me
around.
about the
Been around.
podcast itself. Where can people find it? And then what did you learn,
Yeah.
talking to all these great people?
Oh man, so many things. So, well, the podcast is called the AI and Business Podcast. So very easy to find: Apple, Spotify, the whole nine yards. It has been around for now over 8 years, which is an awfully long time. A little scary to think about, to be honest. There was almost not much to talk about in the early episodes because it was all hypothetical. But and our focus really in the AI and Business Podcast is covering use cases, covering trends, and really covering the minutia of adoption. So we do a lot to crack into. We don't necessarily appeal to the people that want to learn to write Python, but we do appeal to the people who need to do the messy work of getting culture to shift and getting the right projects to actually come into being. So ROI adoption strategy is the hardcore focus, and we do that through trends and use cases across industries. Everybody from global head of AI at Raytheon, IBM, core machine learning at Facebook, head of core machine learning at Facebook, all the way down to interesting startups maybe you haven't heard of, but they might still be worth $1 billion and they're doing really cool things. So that's the range that we cover, but it really is a business person focus. Man, in terms of what I've learned over the years doing that show, I could try to. You're making me. This is a tough question. I could think about what are some of the bigger categories of ahas that I've had and try to be very quick with them if I
Yeah,
could.
please, your
Oh
choice. It's
man,
your answer.
yeah, yeah. Geez. Well, I will say I've learned a lot. More importantly, I've met many, many brilliant people. And if we're ever called upon to give a keynote, I say it all the time. It's not because I'm Captain Smarty Pants here. It's because we've heard from so many great and brilliant people over the years. But when I think about really big insights, one big insight that I think is important for our specific audience, who's very unlikely to be writing the Python, but they're very likely to be in the strategy room and the
Yeah,
procurement process, um, is to understand just how tactful the process of adopting AI really needs to be. So, selling and buying AI needs to be. Here's what I mean by that. On the one extreme, we have promising measurable ROI. Don't talk about strategy, don't talk about capability because the buyer doesn't know what the hell they are anyway when it comes to AI. So just talk about measurable and promise a lot and show some cool demos. And that's that. And often, still to this day, you can't necessarily have a whiz bang demo. People aren't going to buy the buzzword anymore. Thank God we're past that phase, Ganesh. But they're not going to just buy the buzzword. But
right.
if you promise enough near-term ROI and you make it sound like it's IT, you're like, oh, you just plug it in and blah blah. Sometimes you can get the first check cut. And
Yeah,
so that there's a real thing to that. Oh my God, I finally pushed through this project. Wow. So as a vendor, there's a wow to that. As an internal leader, there's a wow to that. But there's a downside. And the downside is we don't have expectations aligned and we haven't set this project up to win. So the tightrope that we're always walking is between the measurable ROI that everybody knows and understands and setting the realistic expectations of, but seriously, guys, how are we going to measure success here and what's success really going to mean, and also what is this project really going to require. So being the opposite of over promising near term ROI
yeah,
is you get the yes and then expectations are wrecked and everybody's surprised when you have to clean the data for 6 months and pop up and the project is toast. The polar opposite, which is also terrible by the way, is going in there talking about the paradigm shifts and how data is going to wake up. And you're not even really talking about a use case, but you're talking about we need to invest in new data infrastructure. And it's all about foundation and no near-term project. Of course, we can't do that either. We need to find a middle ground where we take wherever the person is that we're selling to. We take where they are. Maybe they're at like a 0 on AI maturity or a 1 out of 5. And we need to nudge them 1 or 2 notches forward. We're not going to rip them all the way to sort of a big picture perspective. We need to take them 1 or 2 notches forward and set a foundation here so that they know some of the troubles that are going to come and the challenges, but also how those challenges are inevitable to hit our strategic goals and to build capabilities that are going to make us strong. We need to be frank about enough of that for the project to have a chance to sink in. And it's surprising how many projects still lie in the first extreme. So one of the big insights is that there's a lot of dance to the value of this stuff is in the tactful framing and decision making that really does happen between leaders in an organization. So in every industry, this stuff has come up to the
Yes.
point where we talk a lot about it because it's so important.
No, no, it's so true. I think, in fact, one thing we learned early on, well, we were trying to get these big brands get into AI like 5, 6 years ago, was this thing about the art of storytelling and how do you communicate value, how do you communicate this thing and prepare them to actually be able
Yeah.
to be tactful about it, have the context around it, and really paint a picture. I mean, I went a large healthcare organization. We actually built them a video. They didn't ask for it, just so that they can actually showcase to their board and say, like, this is a future we can help get to, but for making that happen, here is where we need to start. Here are the foundational capabilities we need to go build. Right. So, but I think, you're exactly right. I think we're seeing that all over. A lot of these things get lost, or just falls flat, just because people can't communicate the value proposition of doing something that they're doing. Right. Um,
Yeah. I mean, look, the getting the algorithms right, the data right, there's so many wonderful things we need to think about, but so much of the rubber hitting the road, the check getting cut on the wrong project or the right project is who's in the room being how honest and framing things in what way. And when those dollars start rolling, I don't even care how many great data scientists you have, you're working on the wrong damn thing. So
AI
I
cannot
agree with you in
help.
that respect.
AI cannot help corporate politics yet. So
Nope.
you got to
No.
actually go through that first.
Yeah, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Yeah.
All right. What else? What else did you actually find? What other insight comes to mind?
Man, you know, uh, well, another kind of critical trend that I hinted on slightly here was that companies that have succeeded in this first wave. Well, all right, this is a big picture insight. I haven't even written the full article on this yet, but I'll give it to you. So this is big, and this is over the last 3-4 years actually. Is that most companies felt like they were going to come in, vendor companies. So I'm talking about an insight from the vendor perspective, but this is very
Sure.
relevant for buyers as well. Vendors came in and they were thinking, cool, we're going to access all these different bits of data in, let's say they're working in uh, marketing, or all these different bits of data in inventory management and manufacturing. We're going to integrate this stuff. We're going to provide kind of a suite of different capabilities. We're going to make manufacturing smarter, make marketing smarter. What's actually happened is there's kind of been two paths. And this is incredibly important to understand in terms of who you work with and sort of how you're going to engage with them. Some companies have gone the route of, so they've all realized, Ganesh, that, and I'm sure you did too, that the white glove, heavy lifting, educative work that leads up to an AI sale is insanely intense. It's very, very intense,
Sure.
and it does not guarantee success. Now, somebody's got to do it. So, God bless you guys out there. I'm doing the easy part, right? I'm just talking about it on a show. I don't have to sit there with an executive for 6 hours and be like, but we don't have the data for that, boss. Like I don't have to do, I do sometimes in our strategy work, but I don't have to be there for 6 hours.
Yep. Sure.
Or for 6 months. So, that work is incredibly hard. So, there's two paths you can take. And most people take path A. Path A is, okay, we cannot have onboarding and educating be this complex. We need to find a workflow that's understandable and digestible, not a capability set. A workflow or two or three that are capable and that are digestible. A limited number of data pipes that we can hook up to,
Yep.
and we need to be able to work within the workflows that they're in. I'm not giving these people new tech. I'm not going to have them log into a new
Yep.
cloud solution. I'm not doing that. We're just going to be as close to SaaS as we can be. We think of this as kind of AI SaaS, where
Yep.
we want to make this SaaS-like. We want to deliver on the SaaS promise of you pay us, you get the result, you don't deal with the complexity, but we get real narrow when we play SaaS and we get real surface level when we play SaaS. So it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's a path. Okay. We saw everybody come in through the same pipe. The same pipe was a transformative pipe, a whole department, a whole capability category. Man, we're going to transform this stuff. And most of them went, geez, I'm not going to do this level of white glove. If it takes me 6 months to educate leadership and get the sale, and it takes another 6 months to educate them that, yes, you need to keep the algorithm alive, we're not going to break even on these things, so we're not doing this. A lot of companies learn that. So they started going more SaaS. Easier onboarding, smaller beachheads. That was a big path. Second path is the more platform side.
Yep.
So the platform side is, now few companies have done this well, but some companies have, where they say, we do have a capability that's more broad. We actually do have a suite that we think we can compete with the SageMakers and other folks. Maybe not exactly on what
Sure.
SageMaker does, but a platform-like thing where
Yep.
we have a wider capability category. We're going to find a set of beachheads, sort of specific problems that we can solve, and then we're going to be able to land and expand. Those
Yep.
companies have needed to raise a lot of money to build core tech and
Yep.
a lot of money to sell these loss leader projects. And they've had to have a lot of talented people to figure out how to take this small project and turn it into expansion of capability, expansion of strategy, and expansion of reliance on their tech. So there's a road where you let go of that. You say, I'm done with the white glove. I'm done with it. We're not doing this anymore. I wanted a SaaS company when I started this thing. I don't want a consulting company. We go one route. Few companies will go the platform route. What this means for enterprise buyers is that you've got to understand when you're working with these AI SaaS guys, you're not really building capability. You're not quite, in many cases, necessarily making an investment in AI. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't make you bad, but you can't go to bed at night saying, "Oh, our data's in a better place. We're more capable with AI." But a lot of companies do sort of feel that way. So we've seen a divergence. We've seen most companies go narrow, 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 and now we see enterprises who really do need to understand, guys. Yes, we can work with these surface solutions, and some of them are wonderful, but we've also still got to focus on capability.
Yeah, no, in fact, and I haven't, you know, announced this publicly and stuff yet. So we're building a new healthcare company, and one of the things that when we started talking to all of the healthcare institutions across the world and across the different sub industries and sub domains, it's very evident, right? It was just this one CIO of a large payer telling me it was very episodic of what actually happens across the industry, right? The last 5 6 years, I'm like, if one more company comes to me and say they are a telehealth for a narrow sliver of mental health, right, and
Yeah,
that's all I do, like, I don't know what to do with them, because now I have an island of 50,000 different capabilities with no way of pulling it all together. And especially in a play with like data, like you said, it's the compounding effect that you get when you actually start doing and building capabilities, rather than just solving that one narrow operational AI ROI problem. And then you go to the next one, go to the next one. You look around and say, I just have 15 different SaaS tools right now, or 20 different SaaS tools. I'm doing
yep,
20 different things with no way to capitalize and compound on it to build something better, right? So it's a
yeah,
it's a very it's a grave insight, unfortunately, right? It's one of those things where I don't know which land is going to win, because the other side, like you said, like companies have to raise a lot of money to build that platform. That's also not right,
yeah,
right? And so you just have to figure out. I think that we believe there's a better way. I mean, just a hybrid of the two approaches, where you go and
sure,
still focus on the narrow thing, but then build for the capability. From a investment perspective, how you build for a broader set of capabilities, but focus on or abstract the value realization side to the capability side, right, if you will, right? Um, we can talk about that later. I have a
sure,
ton of
sure.
ideas in that front too, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
This is awesome. Dan, I think, Daniel, we've run out of time, quite over, but it was a fascinating discussion. Where can the listeners and viewers find you on the internet? Where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm just Dan Faggella on LinkedIn or Twitter, so always sharing our research there. But the podcast, which I think if they're listeners would probably have an interest in, is just the AI in Business podcast. So we've got
Yeah.
some great episodes with heads of AI at some fantastic enterprises, some great startups coming up. And then the website is just Emerj, or the newsletter is just emerj.com/N1. So N like newsletter, and then the number one, emerj.com/N1. and one. But otherwise, AI and business podcasts, those are the quick ways to find me. And I'm glad you were able to have me here, Ganesh. This has been a lot of fun. Of
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for taking the time today.
course, brother.